Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for joining. I'm Vanessa Teitelbaum from the Center for Audit Quality, and I am delighted to be joined by our panelists, Krista Parsons from Deloitte & Touche, Tony Anderson, and Karen Goals, who are Audit Committee and board members. And you can see their bios. I don't know if it's on our website or not on the slide, which we'll show in a minute. So we are talking today about our Audit Committee Practices Report, and this is a partnership that the CAQ entered into with Deloitte 3 years ago. So in March of this year, we published the third annual Audit Committee Practices Report. And this is actually like a part 2 webinar. We had this group talked about the top priorities that report identified in an earlier webinar, and that reporting is on Deloitte's website. And today we're going to talk about sort of this some other key elements of the report. And I have a few slides though to start to talk about the key elements of the report. But I think we're going to start with a polling question to understand who our audience is. So what is your role at your company or as a board member? We're going to launch that polling question, and that'll help you get your CPE credit. And so then we can move to the next slide. We'll show the results in a bit. So this is the overview of the Audit Committee Practices Report. And we had 266 responses, primarily from large market cap, more than 700 million, primarily in the United States, 93%, mostly public companies, and 28% were non-financial service, 28% were financial service industries. Then going to the next slide, what we can see in terms of top priorities were cyber, enterprise risk management, finance and internal audit talent, compliance with laws and regulations, and finance transformation. So so let's launch the results of the polling question so that we can see who our audience is here. Okay, so we've got a variety of public and private board members. We've got a good fourth being auditors, 10% being preparers, a few academics, and other corporate governance professionals and other. So I think this will be highly applicable to all these categories. So thanks again for joining. So in terms of our report, I'm going to start with Karen. Well, actually, let's go to the slide about audit quality. So one of the things we talked about was what top 3 items have the most impact on audit quality. And I think we can agree that these responses are not that surprising, but good reminders. So communication between the auditor, the audit committee, and management, quality of the audit firm, including things like inspection results, restatement histories, industry experience, we hear that a lot, and then technical knowledge. So focusing on these areas, we're going to start with Karen. And Karen, in your experience, what contributes most to audit quality, and how do these findings compare with your experience?
Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks to you and everyone else who's responsible for this session and for having me, and to all the audience participants. You know, these responses do very much resonate with me in my own experience chairing audit committees. You know, I believe strong, frank, really clear and open communication between the audit team and the company and its management and the audit committee are what I call my first ingredient of audit quality. And this communication is in both directions. So the company needs to communicate with the auditors as well, to help the auditors be in tune with what's happening today in the company, and importantly, what might be coming down the road in the future, so they can be thinking ahead about the composition of their team, if they need to bring in specialists or things like that. And I think this kind of communication, very open communication, leads to fewer and better yet no surprises or sort of last minute issues. You know, the makeup of the engagement team is vital to audit quality. And that's both from a technical perspective, I'll call it accounting, auditing, technical, but also the industry, particularly if you are in an industry that's fast moving, and these days I think there's no industry that isn't fast moving, right? So the also the continuity of the team, and this is a real challenge, I think, both for companies and also for the audit firm. But continuity is a really important ingredient. And as an audit member and chair, I ask questions about the continuity of the team to the audit firm, whoever they are. And if there's changes, why are there changes? Why are they necessitating changes? Because continuity helps. The last point I will make about what I think enhances quality is, of course, the culture of the firm itself. And, and how do you suss that out? Well, some of the things you ask are, is the firm truly dedicated to the audit practice and to audit quality? Or is it only saying it does? Is it putting money behind quality, new tools, training, all the kinds of things that enhance quality? Or is there more funding going to other parts of a firm? And for this reason, in firms where that happen to audit the companies I'm on the board and audit committee of, I insist on knowing the senior assurance leader. I most likely for the Americas, because all my companies are headquartered in the United States. But I like to joke that I like to know how to dial 911 to the right person in the firm. But it goes beyond that. If you know that person and you have either virtually met them or met in person with them, you can drive home the point about the firm's culture of quality, that we as audit committee members really care about that. And then you can get answers from the firm. Of course, we see the inspection reports and their audit quality reports, but there's nothing like looking a very senior leader of the assurance practice in the eye and say, do you understand how important this is to us, to this company, to the audit committee? And, and I also think, it's important that the audit committee has a balanced discussion about audit quality and fees. You can't just say, lower the fees and never talk about the quality. You have to have both in parity and try to make sure that the firm understands you care about both. So those are a couple of thoughts I had.
Thanks. Tony, before I go to you, I should have a follow-up question for Karen. Have you experienced in what subcultures at firms? So if you're dealing with or differences amongst different firms, I know your background is you're a retired partner from EY, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know for sure, but I can tell you that certainly my antenna is always up when a firm has a very large portion of its practice that is not audit. Because it's hard to know. I mean, you have to get the audit quality reports and you have to get their transparency reports and their inspection reports, of course, from PCAOB. But tough questions to the assurance leader, which is usually a very senior person in the firm, about, well, how are you funding the audit practice as opposed to the other, tax or consulting or whatever other practices they have. Some firms, of course, have had a lot of things they've been contemplating, transactions. And so you always worry if the culture is getting a little bit diluted around, some part of the business. But that's why I insist on knowing some of the senior leaders in the firm, because it's important to really be able to articulate how important the audit quality is.
It's good to hear. Tony, how about for you from your perspective? How do you assess the external auditors that you work with as a board member?
Well, a couple things. One is, I think Karen covered it well in terms of how you evaluate internal audit quality. The only thing I would add to what she articulated is that I like to understand how the firm is going to, or the partner on that account is going to bring the power of the firm to that account. So in my experience, the audit partner is sitting there listening to everything going on at the company. And so that person can look at the different issues and new things that are emerging at that company. And how well do they reach into the firm, throughout the firm, and get specialized people to just have a phone call or to have lunch and to have a nice discussion about a deeper discussion about that topic, whatever it happens to be. And it could be a wide range of things. And I say that because, you know, you have these firms that have these multidisciplinary practices, right? And I think that's good for audit quality. And I think it can be additive to audit quality. And so how do you bring the power of the firm to that company? And I tell you, the only thing I'll add to that is this is not a revenue generating activity. I mean, it's a you know, a phone call for an hour, hour and a half, whatever it is, or it's lunch. So, you know, I think this is a big deal that I don't know if people really spend enough time thinking through and talking about. Tells you a lot about who the partner is on that account. And so I would add that to Karen's comments.
Thanks. I have to say, having being an alum of PwC as senior manager, it was a challenge, but that was our job, was to understand all the resources at the firms, you know, to network and to know, to be able to bring the firm to the client, like you're saying.
Yeah, it's a powerful thing. It's
Right.
amazing how much talent, knowledge that's embedded in these firms. And if you don't bring it to life, then you really miss a great opportunity.
Yeah, and I think I know this group probably, this audience probably understands this, but sometimes I think in the media it gets a little bit conflated, because we're not talking about suggesting your auditor provides non-audit services, which they're prohibited from providing. We're talking about education, right, and understanding the risks and certain issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I said this isn't something that, at least my view as chair of the audit committees I'm on, I'm not looking for, you know, a project here. I'm just looking for insight.
Right, right. Krista, can I ask you a question about, in your experience, either as an auditor or, you know, in your role at the Center for Board Effectiveness, do you see audit committees doing formal evaluations of their external auditor, and what tools, this is a little bit of a plug for a CAQ tool, I'm not going to lie, what tools might there be for this such evaluation?
What tool? No, before I say that, I'm just going to say I couldn't agree more with what Karen and Tony said. And, you know, a lot of what I do at Deloitte is exactly what Tony talked about. It's making sure I know everything we do across the firm, and it is bringing those value added services, because there's just so much that we do across the firm that it really is that conversation, the 30-minute conversation on a topic and issue, something that you're dealing with beyond the audit that can really just add value and insight to the audit committee or somebody else beyond that. So I couldn't agree more with that. No, Vanessa, I'm happy to provide a plug, because I do think it is critical, you know, understanding what your auditors are doing when you think about it from a quality perspective is critical. And I know we at Deloitte do use the CAQ's tool. So there is a tool out there that it's been, I don't know how many years, Vanessa, that you guys have been putting this together, right?
Oh, it's a long time.
Okay.
We don't update it every year. I think the last update is 2021.
Okay,
And,
but it's been around for quite a while, and
Yeah.
it is something we use as well. I know we even use it on ourselves. We will take the tool that the CAQ has on their website and take an inward look at ourselves to say, what are we doing to provide value and to make sure that we are providing a quality audit. And I think it also, when you look back at the results and think about that relationship between the lead partner, the audit committee, making sure that there is that respect, that clear, candid, open, transparent discussions. There's a lot in the tool that talks about that. And the assessment, if I recall correctly, I think there's a few areas in there that it really focuses on that I think are critical to the quality relationship. Talks about the qualifications of the auditor. It talks about how the auditor looks at and promotes, monitors quality. Yep. From an audit perspective, the communications between the external auditor and the audit committee, and then also the independence, the objectivity, professional skepticism that they have. So I definitely would promote using that CAQ's tool. I think it's laid out in a really nice way, and it can be used to assess your external auditors to make sure that there is quality being delivered.
Thanks. I mean, we're a nonprofit. The tool's on our website free. It's called the External Auditor Assessment Tool, but whether you use that tool or not, I think some of the other firms might have other suggestions or our tool is PDF. It's not like a technological tool, but there might be others. And I think like any good performance review, it's the conversation more than the tool, or you're right.
Yeah.
It's just the discussion to have a healthy, constructive discussion about what went well, what could go better. So let's switch.
Hey,
Let's go to, oh
hey,
yeah.
Before you
Yes.
change topic,
Sure,
because
sure.
I do think it's an important process to go through. And so one of the things that I would add to this conversation is, one, having the audit firm do a self-assessment on what they've done, the good, the bad, the ugly, to do their own self-assessment. And then at the company level, for the company to do one, whether, throughout the organization. So at the different subsidiaries that you visit around the world. And so get all of the different pieces that the auditor is engaged with within that company, to also do one. And then also have the audit committee do it. And you bring all of those different pieces together to really get a really healthy view of the performance of the firm. I think you have to do all of it. And one other subtlety here is, when we use the CAQ as a guide, but it's also important to adjust it for the facts and circumstances of that company. And so there will always be things at the company going on, and that you might want to really make sure you get some insight on. And so you got to modify slightly just to make sure that you capture that. But I think it's all those pieces that have got to come together to get a really good view around how the firm performed in a given year.
Thank you. We're going to switch. We're going to do our next polling question. We're going to talk about internal audit. And I see we have a question in the Q&A, which I think will lend itself well to as we talk about internal audit. So I'm going to get to that in a minute. So here's our polling question, which is, at your company, how is internal audit sourced? And while we wait for you to respond to that, it's a good thing I don't need CPA. I'm having trouble answering it, but hopefully you're not. Let's go to the next slide if we could. So we added some questions about internal audit to this year's edition of our report based on some feedback that we received, because while we at the Center for Audit Quality are focused on oversight of the external auditor, we recognize the importance of the ecosystem, and an internal audit is certainly an important part of that. One of the things, so here's what we found. If you look at these, the yellow boxes, 4 to 5 of these are very, very positive. Internal audit has a high level of understanding about business operations, 89%. Internal audit is effective at assisting management in identifying new risks, 86%. Internal audit professionals bring needed insights to stakeholders, 76%. Internal audit plans are promptly updated in response to emergent risks, 87%. So all great. And yet, at my company, there is opportunity to extract more value from internal audit. That's not really negative, but it's seeing an opportunity, and so there's 79% there. So, Krista, I want to ask you what you think about these results. Do they seem inconsistent to you?
Yeah, it is interesting because, as you pointed out, the first 4 very positive. The last one, there are some questions around what exactly that means, and we don't know exactly why the audit committee members that took the survey responded this way. As we sat back and were analyzing the results and trying to pull together the report, there were a couple of things that we came up with as potential options here. One is that potentially it's just not being communicated well. So kind of going back to the last conversation, you think about audit quality, you think about value that the auditor is delivering. Potentially, the chief audit executives may need to be thinking about the way they're communicating the value that they are delivering to the organization through their internal audit group, to the audit committee. So taking a step back, thinking about that, what are we doing as an internal audit organization? Is that value truly getting communicated to the audit committee? If not, maybe that needs to be rethought about how that's being delivered, that communication. The other option is if you read it literally, maybe they are not, the audit committee is not seeing the value that they would expect or that they want to see from the internal audit group. And if that is the case, then potentially that's an opportunity to just revisit the internal audit's mandate to see if it could be modified. Maybe things have shifted since internal audit's current mandate has been put in place, and they may need to be thinking about other things that they could be doing. You know, in some cases, you see an internal audit organization that's focused mostly on SOX type audits. And maybe there's an opportunity to incorporate more operational audits that could bring additional value, bring more insights into the organization and some of their operations. And so this could be an opportunity for the audit committee and the chief audit executive to think about what is the highest and best use of internal audit within the organization, and if there is a chance to shift what the internal audit group is focused on. So if you think about what the role of internal audit is broadly, you have kind of your core responsibility, which is assurance. But then if you think about it, kind of even expanding beyond that, there's a couple of other things they could do. One is to advise management, and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Advising management on things around control effectiveness, any change initiatives that are happening across the organization, thinking about risk, which is such an important topic across organizations. Are there any enhancements to the risk management processes that are in place? And even some of the assurance mechanisms in place and how those are designed. The other thing that I think is really great or important for some audit committee organizations to think about is that more future-looking focus. So is there a way that internal audit can anticipate some of the risks that may be coming down the road and help the business understand what those risks are, help them think about preventative responses? So that forward, future-looking function that really helps prompt awareness on what could go wrong, what the organization can do about it before something happens. So those are some of the observations that we had from the survey itself. One other thing I did want to just mention, Vanessa, because I know it's kind of a more recent development while we have this group, is if they haven't thought about this or heard about this, there is a new standard, some new standards that are out there that I think audit committees should just at least be aware of. And that is in January, the Institute of Internal Audit released some new global internal audit standards that will be effective in January of next year. And just at a very high level, what I think is most important for audit committees to think about, they're principle-based, they're organized into 5 different domains with a bunch of guiding principles that really enable effective internal auditing. The one that I think is most important for audit committees to think about is domain 3. And what this does is it talks about how the internal audit function is governed, the responsibility of the chief audit executive, and how it collaborates with the board or the audit committee and senior management in that governance process. It also recognizes that there are certain things that the board or the audit committee and senior management have to do in order to make sure that internal audit is effective, and also talks about how important it is that the board or the audit committee really has the support, has the back of internal audit across the organization. So I just mentioned that because I know it is something that as I talk to audit committees, a lot of them don't even know that this is out there. And if you haven't heard about it, I would just suggest that you start having conversations with your chief audit executive to make sure that you just understand what it means and how that may be implemented across your organization, because the efforts to do that may depend based upon how mature your existing internal audit function is.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's launch our poll question. The results. Sorry. Here we go. So almost half internally sourced, 100%, 23% co-sourced. I'm surprised actually only 6% outsource it. Maybe that's just because that was my experience as an external auditor of my client. And then NA for 24%. So thanks all for answering that. So Tony, I know we wanted to talk about your experience. You know, in your experience, how effective is internal audit, and what kind of structure have you found to be, you know, pros and cons of these different structures?
So first thing, the findings actually don't surprise me. I think they make sense to me, and so I don't disagree with them personally. I mean, I think internal audit groups, at least the ones that are at my companies, they do a really wonderful job. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. I think the issue to me is this issue around how much value is really being provided? Okay, what additional value is there really to be captured? And I think that's where the opportunity is. And so I find myself going back to the question, how often have the audit committee or management, or probably more the audit committee, is really engaged with the internal auditor about what we want them to do? You know, what is it that we want from them? And it's an interesting question, because I'd be willing to bet most don't. You know, on a regular basis, what is our expectation from the group about, you know, what they're going to do this next year? And so I think there's an opportunity for clear communication both ways about what that is. You know, internal audit, I think, to be honest, I think they're undervalued. I mean, you know, if you think about a company, how many people in a company in an audit role or any other role get a chance to really understand the risks throughout the organization, literally worldwide, and to be able to review, assess, engage? Well, with that kind of touch throughout the organization, you'd think you could come back with a whole host of things, or you know, findings that's really useful. And I'll just give you one simple example, Vanessa, and that's culture. You know, I think we've all learned over the years how important culture is. And how often does the internal audit group really talk about, you know, at least their view of the culture in various operations around the world? And how does it align with the company's desired culture? Now, you might say, okay, do you have the experience to really make that assessment? You can ask those kind of questions, and those are good questions to ask, because I think it's those kinds of things. I think internal audit could really provide really good insight, that's helpful to everybody, management and the audit committee. So, you know, I think there are opportunities to really enhance value, and I think it starts with clear communications about expectations.
Yeah. So I thank you for that. Karen, I want to go to you next. I'm curious about what your experience is with the different models of sourcing internal audit, how internal audit can help with identifying emergent risks. And I'm not sure if you saw it in the Q&A, so let me just also read the question, because it goes to this. And the question is, auditors are required to assess risk every year for every client, but almost all risks originate externally. How can auditors fulfill the requirement to assess risk when they have no mechanism to know the risk exists? So to me, that's saying, how do you identify, you know, risks that you may not, you know, how do you find out, you know, you don't know what you don't know? And so internal audit is not the only option, but since we're on that topic, seem to mesh well with our
Yeah, no,
previous
I
discussion.
think it fits exactly. So let me just say that it's first with respect to how this internal audit function is sourced in the companies I'm on the board of. Each of them has an internally sourced model for internal audit, and I must say that I prefer that model for a couple of reasons. One, I think there are, and this goes a little bit to Tony's point, but there are few groups in any organization that have the unfettered access across the company that internal audit has. And I like to see that access be used for the benefit of the company. So that goes to the value question as well. And I think that's a little harder to achieve with an outsourced model, or even a co-source, because there's still, you know, even as an outsourced or co-source model, particularly outsourced, you're not part of the company. And so, you know, the access and the reach is going to be different. You know, I also liked the internal audit to be a source of experienced, high quality talent to move out of internal audit into the other parts of the company. And I think if that's not happening, that is an opportunity lost in a company. Because again, when you have folks in the internal audit function that have, to Tony's point about global reach, they're seeing all kinds of things. And then they go out into a business unit or into a finance position or into a commercial position. They bring all that knowledge with them. And oftentimes they're not just bringing knowledge, they're bringing wide knowledge of individuals across the company. Internal audit touches so many places. They oftentimes know more people than, almost anybody else in the company. And there's just a lot of benefits when people with that wide of an aperture get out and also to the other side of the company, because sometimes people are afraid of auditors, whether internal or external, or they just have just a little bit of a fear, right? And that can be broken down if you've got somebody that came from that function is now there. So, and it also creates opportunities for within, internal audit functions are only going to have so many positions that people can go up to. And so there's oftentimes, there's only one ultimate leader and there might be some managers, but there's not a lot of progression opportunity. And this is a way to give people other opportunities. On the risk point, I think identifying emerging risks is part of whether it's the ERM program, and that could be overseen by risk management or by internal audit functions, or sometimes it's even in general counsel. And of course, you seek input from within the company, but it is extremely important to the participant who raised the question. You need to seek external perspectives. You need to have whether it's speakers, whether you're going to have speakers about your industry, whether you're going to have reading material, wide swaths of reading material. Like I mentioned, I think on our last call, Eurasia Group publishes, which is a fantastic thing. It's publicly available. You don't have to be a subscriber. They publish annually their top risks. And it is a great read. It's not a long read either. But also Ian Bremer, who of course oversees Eurasia Group, is a frequent speaker on different panels and so forth. And all those webinars are free. And so it can be can be kind of overwhelming because the guy is so knowledgeable. But also I look across to things like Transparency International, the World, the World Bank, the IMF. What are they saying about the kinds of risks? Because they also are sometimes talking about not just the risks in an industry, but the risks in given countries that could rise up to be control risks or other kinds of risks. I also do. I have a slight difference of opinion with the participants' question. I think all risks don't come from external. There are risks that come from inside the company, either because of change. You have change in management, people change roles. All different kinds of things happen. So I think you have to be really looking, kind of scanning across. And I think the days of the enterprise risk management being kind of once a year task is long gone. This has to be in the companies that I work with. This is a much more periodic, almost ever refreshing activity. Now you're not doing it every day, of course, but and also not only do you ask management, but ask the board. On my companies, the board is a participant into that risk function over time, and you can track over time what's happening. Read the analyst reports of your company. See what people like external investors and analysts are saying, because they will highlight risks to execution, risks to the industry that can be very informative. And think broadly about the risks, but don't make so many risks that people can't figure out what to do with them all. When the list is 50, then we have to have some kind of prioritization. My mother used to say, I only want to know about the top 3 things today, Karen. So you really have to, I think, try to look at the risks that could have the highest likelihood and would have a high impact. I call them the kill the company or severely injure the company risks. And then lastly, I think on the point about value, and this picks up on a thread from Tony's comments. It's really incumbent on the company and the audit committee to try to make that function deliver value. Just like like a business makes every other function deliver value, measured differently, not measured by the earnings per share or the P&L, but they certainly, well-trained, experienced internal audit people can add so much more beyond SOX, because, and I'll just give an example. On 2 of the boards I'm on, the internal audit team is highly sought after by the business to assist. They get calls. In fact, we have to say, wait a minute, you're getting so many management requests, we can't get the other stuff done. So we try to keep a balance, and But they're called on to advise if a unit says, I think I have an issue, I'm not sure, we have something new going on, I want to make sure the controls they're not taking the responsibility to design the control, because that's the first line, right? They're the second line or the third line, but they are definitely helping to look at it. And also internal audit can have a really important role in a company around looking at third parties like suppliers. And if you have distributors or customers that hold inventory or any of those kinds of things, and third parties are, an increasing place where people are talking about the risk, and internal audit should be in there. And part of what those agreements between the company and the party should say is that the internal auditors have the right to go there.
Yeah.
And ask questions and inspect.
So it sounds like, the audit committee plays such a big role in terms of working with the internal auditors to be effective. So I think those are great comments. Thank you. Let's go to the next polling question. Make sure everyone gets your CPE. We want to know, on average, how long is your quarterly audit committee meeting? And this can include earnings calls if you have them as part, and if not, that's fine. And then we'll go to the next slide, please. And just talk about some of our survey findings. So just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about audit committee effectiveness during meetings. This comes up a lot in our discussions. And then part of the reason we did the survey was to help audit committees and those supporting audit committees with some benchmarking. So the following, as you see on the slide, these are the results of what would likely enhance audit committee's effectiveness during meetings. Top one, 29%, increasing discussion and or engagement from members. So to me, that's fewer report outs, fewer presentations, more discussion. And I think that goes hand in hand with the second finding, which is improving the quality of the pre-read materials. So if you can provide the information and assume everybody has read it, and then it frees up information for discussion. Although I did hear Jeff Bezos say once that in his meetings, they actually provide like 20 or 30 minutes for the entire committee. I don't know if it's a board necessarily meeting for reading materials, because he doesn't think people read them in advance. So that's just another option. The third thing here is improving the quality of presentations during meetings. Again, I think to me that might be shortening it. And then 35% said nothing. So meetings are effective, so that's good. Other less common responses, improving the level of audit committee member advanced participation. Some said increasing the length of existing meetings, improving management of the agenda, and potentially increasing the total number of committee members. These are all options that we heard. So with that, let's launch our polling results if we could. So 1 to 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours, the majority. And I know this is a little bit tricky because people have different cadences. And so that question might be answered differently. Tony, I'm going to start with you. In your view, how effective are your audit committee meetings? I'm sure they're effective, but if there opportunity for improving them, what are some things that you have focused on, or what's your sense of these results from our survey?
The results, the results are not surprising to me. I think they are in line with the way I would think about it. I mean, for me, on my audit committees, I'm not in Jeff Bezos camp. Okay, so I read everything, right? So and usually there are topics in there where I have to go get some other readings just to make sure I'm well prepared to talk about it. So and I think in my committees, I think my members do I feel pretty comfortable that they have read all the material. So I haven't had that challenge. I don't like going through.
I think we lost Tony for a second. He will probably come back. Karen, well, Tony's Wi-Fi. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Karen, maybe I'll skip to you. I'm sure Tony will be back with us in
Yeah.
a second. How about
Okay.
for you in terms of audit committee meeting effectiveness?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One thing is on my committees, we try to lay out the agendas for the committee for the whole year in advance.
Right.
And that gives everybody like kind of a long view on what we're going to be talking about. And of course, we always have time to cover if something emerging or unexpected comes up. But I think planning in advance helps everybody get ready and get prepared. And then, under the, tell me once and tell me again, shortly before the meeting, before the advanced materials are out, I send a reminder to the audit committee members about what the agenda is for the upcoming meeting, which might only be 4 days from now. But it allows them to focus and just get their juices going about, okay, yeah, you're right, I've got to remember to talk about this. And then they know as they get ready to review. My committee members say they find that helpful. But the last thing I would say is ask people. Okay, if you're the chair of the audit committee, don't be afraid to ask your fellow committee members in a one-on-one. You can do it in executive session, but of course you don't want to have group things. So I ask them to give me 15 minutes or 20 minutes after a meeting. I don't do it every meeting, but I ask them, okay, is there anything we should be doing that we're not? Is there anything we should stop doing? Is there anything that I'm not doing or that I am doing, either way, that is either helping or inhibiting discussion, really frank discussion. And I think that's, very helpful. I receive feedback that says they feel that it's very open, they can speak their minds. They're not afraid to raise a topic either in or after a meeting. And I think that's really assisting with the effectiveness. Now, of course, we have formal assessments as well. And I think that's best done by an external provider because, when I say that, I mean not a lawyer conducted assessment. And you need to let these really talented people, actually talk to the committee members so that they can suss out if there's some underlying thing, that's kind of like the sand in the oyster, right? That's, an irritant. So those are a couple thoughts.
Thanks. Hi, Tony.
Sorry, Vanessa.
That's okay.
Lost you
Welcome
there.
back.
Did you finish that topic?
Nope. Go ahead and finish your thought.
No, I was just going to add that, and so I think everybody reads the material and everybody comes prepared. I don't like page turners. I like discussion, and in those discussions, I will frequently say to one of my fellow board members who's quiet, "Do you have a point of view on this topic?" Or I'll say, Vanessa, you were in a technical role. What's your point of view on that topic? Or you have a IT background. How do you think about what this person said? So I actually try to pull everybody into the discussion. Now, on a couple of my audit committees, I don't have to pull them. I mean, I'm trying to keep them around. So they're really engaged. And so but when need be, I really try to pull people into the discussion when we're on a topic. And so that's kind of how I manage that, Vanessa. And so that's what I'll offer for the group.
Thanks. Krista, from your perspective, what do you hear about the challenge of, we've seen, right, scope creep, so much more happening, putting on the agenda of the audit committee. And so that's, I think why the topic of meeting management and effectiveness, do audit committees need more time? Do they need more people, or do they need, more a different focus? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think I would just underscore too, I think, Karen and Tony as audit committee chairs, I think are experts here. And I just want to underscore the two things they said. I think Karen's comment about asking for feedback, I love that. Waiting to do it once a year after, maybe something's not sitting right with your committee members, do it real time, get that feedback, make the adjustments, I think is amazing. And then pulling people in, as Tony said, sometimes people may not just naturally provide their insights, and being able to pull them in, I think is fantastic. but it's hard. You know, this, Vanessa knows this, as we go through every year and we talk about questions. This is the one that I always gravitate to, because I meet with a lot of audit committee members throughout the year. And this is the topic that everybody, I don't care if it's a brand new audit committee member or a very experienced audit committee chair, they're always trying to figure out, how can I be more effective? Because I never hear an audit committee chair say, you know, I've got an extra hour on my agenda. What do I need to do to fill that time? It's always, how do I get through all this material? We've got so much to talk about. And so trying to figure out, how do you effectively get through the meeting, but get through the stuff you need to get through in an effective way and make sure you're hitting on the right topics is really important. So if I think about some of the maybe tips or things that we hear, a lot of what I have in kind of my toolbox are things I hear from people like Tony and Karen. Going back to the 3 areas that you highlighted, Vanessa, at the beginning as the top 3 topics. One, I would say, is the chair is so important in this equation here. They need to create that environment that is a safe environment that really supports that open dialogue for candid conversation. So, you know, one of the items was that, I think it was the top one, was that they felt like there could be an opportunity for more conversation, more discussion and engagement from the actual committee members. They need to feel like there's a safe environment, and that's really the role of the chair, to create that environment and make sure that they are hearing from everybody. People feel like they can have that candid conversation with everyone in the room. I think it's also important for people to stay informed between meetings. So the days of, you know, you get your pre-reads and you read them, you go to the meetings and have the conversation, and then you don't do anything until the next pre-read comes, really are gone. And so using some of the materials, Karen gave some great ideas to stay informed on the business, competitors, industry. You need to have that information kind of coming throughout the time in between meetings, so that when you get to the meeting, you have a lot of things that you can pull from. And then when you're in there, having questions ready, I kind of call them high gain questions. So it's really asking those questions that get behind, kind of underneath management's thought process. If you're thinking like from a financial perspective and you're looking at some of the estimates or numbers, you know, how did you come up with the estimates? Where were the hard calls, close calls, gray areas? Kind of the old but good one, what's keeping you up at night? Asking things like that. A couple other ones, when you think about the pre-read materials, presentations, executive summaries are fantastic to, you know, everybody does have a responsibility and should read pre-reads, but also helping point the audit committee to, here are the really important things you need to also focus on, versus expecting them to find it on page 152, you know, buried somewhere, I think is important. So really helping them focus on what is important is a great thing. And then when it comes to the presentations themselves, as Tony said, you don't want to be flipping the slides. You do need to expect that everybody read the materials, but assuming they were read, start your conversation where those pre-reads end. Don't flip the slides. And then one rule of thumb that we have is that whatever amount of time that is on the agenda for a particular topic, assume that you have about 1/3 of that time to present, and then the other 2/3 is for conversation, questions, all of the discussion between the committee members and yourself or whoever's involved, so that it is really more about the discussion and not just getting a presentation from whoever is speaking. So those are a few of the tips that we would have.
Hey, Vanessa,
Thanks.
can I
Yes.
add just a couple of quick
Please.
things?
Yeah.
And I know we have a timeline here, so if we run out of time, please stop me. But on this issue about having more topics than we have time, one of the things that I've done is I've kind of put in a hard stop after 3 hours. Okay, hard stop. Okay, we're not going to have an audit committee meeting longer than 3 hours. And the idea there is, you know, it's hard to stay fresh and engaged at a level after that 3-hour mark, is what I found. And so if you can't cover what you need to cover in those 3 hours, then you ought to be talking with the team about adding another meeting. And so it may be, given the number of things that are on our agenda today, 4 audit committee meetings a year just isn't going to cut it. Right. So hard stop, keep everybody engaged, add another meeting if you need to. So that's one thing I would add to this discussion. And you know, that's just I don't know, it's human nature in some ways, being able to keep everybody engaged. And so I wanted to add that. The other thing I wanted to add is something, Krista, you were just saying there at the end, and I just lost my train of thought on that topic. Gosh, you just said it too, and it triggered something for me. So I'll come back to it. Let's go
That's
on.
okay. Let's do our polling question.
I'm getting
It'll come
old.
to you in a second. As soon as we do the polling question, it'll come to you. I have no doubt.
Okay.
So let's do our next polling question, which is, and this is going to be our next discussion topic. Are all board members able to attend audit committee members? And we're going to explain a little bit more what we need, but just answer this on its face. You know, yes, no, yes or no. And then we'll give that a second while you answer those. Tony, did you remember your point yet? Okay,
Keep going.
that's fine. Okay, so I'm gonna go to Karen, and we are getting close to the end, which is fine. I want to have time for key takeaways from you guys too. So Karen, we've talked about this a little bit in prep. And Krista and Tony, you know, how do you, one of two things, how do you communicate amongst committees? How do you make sure the board is informed? And so some, not all, have allowed for board members to now attend is a little bit like to observe an audit committee meeting. So do you do that? I've heard different people say that, you know, it works for some, not for others.
And Vanessa, that was to me? Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. Yeah, so and my boards, in some there's not really an open invitation, to be honest, for everybody else to attend or observe. In some there is, but as audit chair, I'm very strict to, in advance, I tell them, yes, you're welcome, but you are an observer and you may not hijack the agenda because we have to accomplish what is on our thing. So the other way we've addressed that is that everybody, all board members, can see any of the audit committee materials that are in the board portal. Because what's in the audit committee is there's nothing that would be, you know, sensitive like you might have in the human capital committee, people's compensation or something like that. But so I think that works a lot. I do have some where the CEO attends, and some where they choose not to. That can be a little bit interesting to make sure that the management team feels free to say whatever they've got to say. So then it's extraordinarily important that you have an executive session without the CEO present. So a couple thoughts.
Thank you. Let's launch our polling question. The results. So 52% say yes. I don't know if I'm surprised. I guess I am a little, but I don't know why. Tony, what do you think? What do you do with the boards that you've been on?
So first, if you back up for a second, all the things that we need to do in an audit committee or in a compensation committee or in a nom and gov committee, those things are board responsibilities. And so if you go back to the basics here, you got a board of directors, all these responsibilities exist, and the board manages that by creating these committees. So they say, okay, we want you to take these things. We want you to handle that in audit. We want comp to do this. And so they've delegated those responsibilities to the committees. And so from that perspective, I think it would be inappropriate to tell another board member they can't attend. So, you know, for me, anybody's welcome to come and attend the meeting. But like Karen said, you know, I'm pretty clear about you're not here to talk. You're here to listen, right? So, you know, if you have something you want to share, that you want to share, then do it with me after the meeting. But for the meeting, the committee is exercising what the board has asked it to do, and we're going to report our discussion and whatever we approve to the full board. So I think you have to be, you know, fairly strong as a chair in managing that process. So members are welcome to join, listen only. Any observation they have, they can certainly share it with me after the meeting. It's kind of the way I manage that. And to be honest, thus far, it's worked well.
Great. We do have a question, which is and I'll ask Tony maybe first, and then Karen and Krista from your audit committee engagement. Are all board members invited to the executive sessions or just the audit committee members?
For me, it's the audit committee members.
Mhm.
For
And
me
so-
as well. Yeah, for me as well,
Yeah.
because the board members are observers.
Okay.
Yeah,
To
they're
Tony's
observers.
point.
And so it's our audit committee, and I try to leave, a fair amount of time for that session. So every meeting we may, we schedule out, executive sessions with a whole host of people through the company and everything. But every meeting we have a private session, just us. And I implemented something that Jamie Dimon does over at Chase. He's at the beginning of his, the slides, it says, since we last met. And he goes through what's happened since the last time we met. And I found that really effective. And so I actually try to do that in my audit committee meeting. Since we last met, here's some things that have happened that we all just ought to be grounded in. I think it's a terrific thing to start. And so sometimes that might create a private session at the beginning of a meeting.
Awesome. So I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. We're going to do a quick round of key takeaways before we go. Thank you so much to Tony, Krista, and Karen, and to the team behind the scenes from the CAQ. As we said in the beginning, you will receive CPE certificates if you completed the polls via email, and it takes about 3 weeks. So bear with us. It takes a little time, but you'll get them. So Krista, then Karen, then Tony, can you give this group your key takeaway before we wrap?
Yeah, it's hard to take one from this. I think there were such great tips and ideas from everybody, but I think what I'm gonna say is that taking a look at, thinking about what we talked about and also looking at the report, I think that for me, one of the things is that you can look at what we discussed through the lens of the audit committee, or I know we had a lot of people here that were either auditors or governance professionals. So you can take a look at this through both lenses on how to make the audit committee more effective or more efficient. So really thinking about all these through whatever lens you're coming at this through, I think we can all work together to make audit committees as effective and efficient as they can be. So thank you guys very much for being here.
I love
Okay,
that.
I'll go,
Karen,
Vanessa. Since
yeah.
okay, my key takeaway is don't have your audit committee be bound by historical practices or your predecessor audit committee chair, because this includes things like timing, topics, agenda, approaches, because the expectations are changing. They've changed dramatically, and they are continuing to change with scope and reach. Think sustainability, cyber, all those other things. So I think new approaches and thinking are called for to respond to those expectations. So don't be tied to the historical past.
That's awesome. No Sally, same as last year. Tony, last word from you, please.
I'm going to say this, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, okay? But I think today, probably more than ever, when you think about audit committees and audit committee chairs, you have to have really strong leadership. I mean, because literally everything that happens at that company is going to touch the audit committee in some form or fashion. And so strong leadership. And that is, identifying the topics you're going to cover. How much time do you spend really getting the topics right for that meeting? And so that's what I would leave with everybody, that the importance of strong leadership for that committee.
Well, great. Well, thank you both, all three of you, so much for joining us. Thanks to our participants. And if you have a colleague who wants to listen, this recording will be up on our website in the near future. Thanks again. And have a great day.
Thank you, guys. And
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Bye.